I never expected that a simple Wednesday night shift would change my entire life. But there I was, wiping down table 17, trying to push through another exhausting evening, when I saw him, an elderly veteran, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes carrying stories nobody in that diner could ever understand. Something about him felt heavy, like he'd been living with a kind of silence that no one should ever have to carry alone. And for some reason, the moment he sat down, I felt this sudden, overwhelming tug in my chest. I couldn't explain it, but I knew I had to do something for him. Before I continue, you won't believe what I did next, and you definitely won't believe what he left behind. But before we go on, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. It really helps the channel grow, and I appreciate each one of you. I walked over with my usual smile, the one I practiced in the mirror just to hide how tired I truly was. "Evening, sir. Coffee?" I asked, trying not to stare at the faded military patch on his jacket. He nodded gently. "Yes, ma'am. Black. Thank you." His voice was soft, but carried a weight that made me pause. As I filled his cup, I noticed his hands trembling slightly, not from age, but from something deeper, something like memories. He ordered just a small breakfast, eggs, toast, nothing more. I knew that order. It was the "I'm stretching every dollar I have" order. And when I stepped away, I caught him quietly counting the bills in his wallet when he thought no one was watching. My throat tightened. Maybe it was because my own dad was a veteran. Maybe it was because the holidays were coming and everything already felt heavier. Maybe it was because kindness had been in short supply lately, and I desperately wanted to put some of it back into the world. Whatever the reason, I made a decision. I walked over to the counter, grabbed his bill, and slid my debit card across the register before anyone else could stop me. "He won't be paying tonight," I whispered. I didn't do it for attention. I didn't do it for a thank you. I just did it because it felt right. But when he realized I'd paid for his meal, when he slowly reached for his jacket pocket, that's when everything changed. And what he left behind was something I never could have anticipated. The moment he realized his bill was already taken care of, the veteran froze with his hand halfway into his jacket. His eyes lifted toward me, slowly, carefully, as if he wasn't sure he'd heard the cashier correctly. "She paid for you, sir," the hostess repeated, pointing toward me. He turned his head in my direction, and God, the way he looked at me, it wasn't confusion, it wasn't embarrassment, it was something deeper, something raw enough to make me feel like I had stumbled into the middle of someone's private memory. I gave him a small nod, the kind you use when you're trying to say it's okay without embarrassing someone. He stood up from his booth with surprising steadiness for a man his age. His boots, old, worn, echoed softly across the diner floor as he walked toward me. "Miss," he started, clearing his throat, "you didn't have to do that." "I know," I replied with a gentle smile. For a moment, he just stared at me, studied me, like he was trying to understand why someone would show him kindness for no reason. Most folks don't go out of their way anymore, not for old men like me. His words hit harder than I expected. There was no self-pity in them, no bitterness, just truth. A truth I'd seen before in the eyes of too many veterans who came through our doors. "Well," I said softly, "maybe tonight someone should." He blinked slowly, and then his hand went back into his jacket, hesitant,
almost nervous. For a second, I thought maybe he was pulling out a few folded bills to repay me, but instead, he pulled out a small, worn envelope. The edges were frayed, the paper yellowed with years, and written across the front in shaky handwriting was one word: honor. He held it out to me with both hands like it was something fragile. He've held this for a long time, longer than I can remember, really. Never found the right person to give it to. He paused, his voice trembling just enough for me to notice. But tonight, I think that person might be you. I stared at the envelope, unsure if I should even touch it. My heartbeat was thundering in my ears, and even the diner seemed to fall eerily silent around us. "Sir, what is this?" I whispered. He didn't answer, not right away. Instead, he gently placed the envelope in my hand, folded my fingers over it, and whispered, "Open it when I'm gone." A shiver ran through me. Gone? What did that mean? Before I could speak, before I could ask, he turned and slowly walked back toward the exit. And the moment the bell above the door chimed behind him, I felt the first real ripple of something I couldn't explain. Something was happening, something I wasn't prepared for. The bell above the diner door hadn't even stopped echoing when my fingers tightened around that worn envelope. It felt too light to matter, yet too meaningful to ignore. I stared at the front of it, at that single word, honor, written in faded ink that looked like it belonged to another lifetime. For a few seconds, I just stood there behind the counter, frozen. The smell of frying bacon, the clatter of plates, the low hum of conversations, everything around me blurred into a distant static. My world had narrowed to the soft, delicate weight in my hand. "Hey," my coworker Jenna whispered, nudging my arm. "You okay? You look like you just saw a ghost." I I don't know," I murmured. "He gave me this, told me to open it when he was gone." "Gone? Gone where?" she asked, brows raised. I didn't answer, because the truth was, I didn't know either. But something in his voice, something in the way he said it, it felt final. Too final. "Maybe he meant when he left the diner," she said, trying to lighten the mood. "Come on, open it." But I shook my head. No, not yet. I needed a moment. I needed air. I needed to understand why a stranger would hand me something that looked old enough to be a family heirloom. So when my break finally came, I slipped outside into the cold night. Streetlights flickered overhead, and the town felt almost abandoned this late. I glanced down at the envelope again. "Open it when I'm gone." His voice lingered in my mind like an echo, refusing to fade. My hands trembled as I slid a finger under the flap. The paper cracked slightly, so old it felt like it might crumble between my fingers. Inside was a check. A check so crisp and white that it didn't match the envelope at all. My breath caught. I pulled it out slowly, my eyes scanning the numbers once, twice, then a third time because my brain refused to believe what I was seeing. $50,000, written neatly, bold, real. My knees nearly buckled, and I pressed my back against the cold brick wall just to steady myself. "No, no, this can't be real," I whispered, my voice barely holding together. Why me?" My heart pounded so hard it felt like it was shaking every rib in my chest. I flipped the check over, expecting maybe a note, a clue, something. But instead, there were just 4 handwritten words on the memo line. For what you gave. A cold rush went through me. What did I give? A meal? A moment of kindness? None of it made sense. And suddenly, a terrifying thought hit me. What if something had happened to him after he walked out? Because the street in front of the diner was empty. Too empty.
I stuffed the check back into the envelope, my breath catching and sharp, uneven bursts. The empty street stretched out in front of the diner, quiet, still, and wrong. It shouldn't have bothered me this much, but something in my gut twisted with a sense of urgency I couldn't explain. I rushed back inside, the bell chiming above me as I pushed through the door. "Jenna," I said, my voice thinner than I intended, "did you see which way he went?" She looked up from the coffee machine, confused. "Who? The veteran guy?" "No, he left fast. Didn't even look back." My stomach dropped. Why wouldn't he look back? I grabbed my jacket from the hook beside the register and slipped it on. "Oh no," Jenna said, following me with wide eyes. "You're not going out there, are you?" "I just need to check something," I said, already walking toward the door. "I'll be quick." But the truth was, I didn't feel quick. I felt like the world had slowed to a crawl, each second stretching painfully long as I jogged down the sidewalk. The cold wind whipped at my face, but I barely felt it. I scanned every doorway, every alley, every shadowy corner. Nothing. The streetlights flickered. A distant car passed with a low rumble. But the old man, the one with trembling hands and tired eyes, he was gone. I tightened my grip on the envelope until my fingers ached. Why give me something like this? Why leave without explaining? Why me? My mind spun with 100 questions, none of which had answers. A block down the street, I spotted an older gentleman leaning against a lamppost smoking a cigarette. He looked like he'd been there a while, so I hurried toward him. "Excuse me," I called out. "Did you see an older veteran walk by? Gray hair, military jacket?" He exhaled smoke and squinted at me. "Yeah, I saw someone like that. Walking kind of slow. Looked tired. Which way did he go?" He pointed toward the small park across the street. "That way, but—" He hesitated before adding, "He was holding on to the railing like he was in pain." A chill washed over me, so fast I nearly shivered. "Thank you," I said, already moving. The park was dimly lit, the kind of place people avoided at night. My boots crunched against the gravel path as I hurried past empty benches and bare trees. Every shadow felt like it was holding its breath. "Hello?" I called out. "Sir, are you here?" No answer. Just the rustle of wind through brittle branches. Then, just as I reached the footbridge in the center of the park, I stopped. My heart dropped hard. Lying on the bench beside the bridge, half hidden in the dark, was his jacket, folded neatly, deliberately, placed with care. And beneath it, something glinted faintly in the moonlight. A military dog tag. My breath froze in my throat. Why would he leave these behind? Where was he? I stood there, staring at the folded jacket and the single dog tag resting beneath it, my breath forming shaky clouds in the cold air. Everything inside me tightened. My chest, my throat, my fingers. It felt wrong. Too intentional. Too final.
I stepped closer, each crunch of gravel under my boots echoing through the empty park like a warning. "Sir?" I called softly, even though I already sensed he wasn't there. "Are you... are you okay?" Silence. I reached out with trembling hands and lifted the jacket. It was still warm. My heart stuttered. That meant he had been here moments ago. Minutes, maybe less. The warmth against my palms made the world feel colder somehow, like the world around me shifted into something heavy and unfamiliar. When I picked up the dog tag, it clinked softly, the metal cool and thin. I turned it over under the faint glow of a street lamp. Thomas W. Hale, followed by a serial number. And then a faded engraving near the bottom. Never left behind. My throat tightened again. That phrase, never left behind, felt like a message, but I didn't know how to read it yet. I looked around, scanning the banks of the small stream that ran beneath the bridge. The moonlight shimmered on the water, but no footprints, no movement, no sign of anyone. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. Panic started creeping up my spine. I pulled out my phone and hesitated. What would I even say? "Hi, I paid for a veteran's meal and he left me a $50,000 check and disappeared into the night, leaving his jacket and dog tag behind." Nobody would believe that. Still, something didn't feel right. I needed to do something, anything. I called Jenna. She picked up immediately. "Please tell me you're back at the diner." "I'm at the park," I whispered. "I found his jacket and his dog tag." "What? Why would he leave that?" "I don't know. I think he might be in trouble." There was a pause on her end. Then, "Do you want me to call someone?" I stared at the empty bridge, the unmoving water, the silent park. I think, I swallowed hard, "I think I need to call the police." "Okay, do it, and come back to the diner. Don't stay out there alone." But even as she said it, something caught my eye. A faint, flickering reflection on the surface of the water. Not light, not moon, something else. I stepped closer, gripping the railing. There, barely visible beneath the shallow water, was a footprint. A single, deep boot-shaped impression pressed into the mud under the surface, heading away from the bank. Not toward the path, not toward the street, but deeper into the darkness behind the trees. He had gone that way, alone, hurting, and leaving things behind as though he meant to disappear. My heart slammed hard against my ribs. "Sir," I whispered into the night, "what happened to you?"
My breath turned shallow as I stared at that footprint submerged in the cold water. One deep, unmistakable mark pressed into the mud. It wasn't old. It wasn't weathered. It was fresh, recent, deliberate. I felt something sharp twist in my chest as I leaned over the railing for a better look, the envelope still clutched tightly in my hand. Who walks into the dark woods behind the park in the middle of the night? Who leaves behind a jacket, a dog tag, and a check worth more than I make in a year? I backed away from the railing and dialed 911, my fingers shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. 911, what's your emergency? Hi, yes, there's a man, I stammered, an elderly veteran. I think he might be in trouble. He left his jacket and his dog tag behind, and I found footprints going into the woods. Is he missing, injured? Did you see him fall? No,
I whispered, glancing nervously at the tree line. But something's wrong. He gave me something important, and then he disappeared. The operator's tone softened. We'll send a unit to your location. Please stay where you are. But staying still felt impossible. My feet were already shifting, inching closer to the trees as if pulled by some invisible thread. Ma'am, do not enter the woods, the operator warned. I won't. I'll wait for officers. But the moment I hung up, the quiet swallowed me whole again. The branches creaked in the wind, leaves brushed together with soft whispering sounds, and that single footprint stayed burned in my mind like a beacon pulling me forward. What if he was hurt? What if he needed help? What if the reason he gave me that check was because he knew he wouldn't make it out? I took a step, then another, and before I even realized it, I was moving off the gravel path and onto the cold, uneven ground of the forest floor. The beam from a lone street lamp barely reached beyond the first few feet, but a faint, disturbed line of leaves shifted, crushed, created a trail. My pulse hammered in my ears as I followed it, one hesitant step at a time. Sir? I called out, my voice trembling. Mr. Hale? Can you hear me? No answer. Just the rustle of branches and my own uneven breathing. I walked deeper until the park lights faded behind me and darkness wrapped around everything. The cold felt sharper here, biting through my jacket. I hugged myself, trying to fight the chill clawing up my spine. Then, a sound. A soft, ragged cough. My head snapped toward the right, heart leaping into my throat. Sir, is that you? I whispered. Another cough. Weak, strained, coming from behind a cluster of bare shrubs. I hurried around them and froze. There, slumped against the base of a tree, was the veteran, Thomas Hale. His face pale, his breathing shallow, one hand pressed weakly against his chest. He looked up at me with tired, fading eyes. You shouldn't have followed, he whispered. My heart cracked. Why? What happened? He opened his mouth to answer, and then his eyes rolled back. His body slumped sideways. Sir, I screamed, dropping to my knees. Sir, stay with me, please.
Sir, please open your eyes. My voice cracked as I grabbed his shoulders, shaking him gently, terrified I'd shake too hard and make something worse. Thomas's head lolled to the side, his breaths shallow, quick, and uneven. For one terrifying second, I thought they stopped entirely. I pressed trembling fingers to his neck. There, a pulse. Weak, but there. Oh, thank God, I whispered, my breath shaking out of me. I pulled off my jacket and draped it over him, trying to keep his body warm against the cold earth. His skin felt icy, and panic surged through me like an electric current. I reached for my phone with shaking hands, ready to call 911 again. But when I checked the screen, no signal. Of course, of all places, the woods behind the park had dead zones. It felt like the world was closing in around us. Sir, can you hear me? I asked, leaning closer. His eyelids fluttered, barely lifting.
I told you not to follow me, he whispered, voice thin as paper. No, no, don't talk like that, I said, trying to steady my tone. I'm here. You're not alone, okay? Help is coming. He gave a tiny shake of his head. Help takes too long. Don't say that, I pleaded, fighting back tears. He coughed, a painful, rattling sound that made my chest tighten. When he opened his eyes again, it was something there, a kind of acceptance I wasn't ready for. I didn't leave that check for you because of the meal. It was because you saw me. Saw him. Not the uniform, not the years. Him. My throat closed up. Of course I saw you. Why wouldn't I? He drew in a shaky breath. People walk past me every day, invisible. You were the first person in a very long time who looked at me like I was still here. His words shattered something inside me. I didn't give you anything special, I said, tears blurring my vision. He gave a faint, ghost-like smile. Kindness is the rarest currency. His breathing hitched again, the pauses between inhales growing longer. I felt helpless, so painfully helpless. I pressed the envelope to his chest gently. Why me? I asked softly. Why leave something so important to someone you barely know? His eyes drifted toward the trees, like he was looking at something far beyond us, something years away. Because, he whispered, I wanted to leave the world on a good memory. My heart cracked open. Hey, no, stay with me, please, talk to me. His eyes shut slowly. Sir? Thomas? Please, please don't close your eyes. I shook him again, panic spiking through me. Sir! His chest rose, then fell, then stopped. For a moment, the entire world went silent. No! I sobbed, my voice breaking in the dark. Someone help! My scream echoed through the woods, and somewhere behind me, twigs snapped under heavy footsteps. Someone was coming. The snap of twigs behind me sliced through the air like a warning. My whole body jerked as I spun around, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might crack my ribs. For a split second, the darkness held its breath. Then a flashlight beam cut through the trees. "Hello?" a voice called out. "Is someone out here?" Relief hit me so hard my knees nearly buckled. "Over here!" I shouted, waving frantically. "Please, over here! He's not breathing!" Two officers emerged from the shadows, their boots crunching through the underbrush. One knelt beside me immediately, while the other swept the flashlight around, scanning the area. "What happened?" the kneeling officer asked, already checking Thomas's pulse. I found him like this," I stammered. "He collapsed. I didn't know what to do. My phone lost signal." "It's okay," he said calmly, though his expression tightened when he pressed two fingers to Thomas's neck. "We'll take it from here." The other officer stepped closer. "Dispatch said something about a missing veteran?" I nodded quickly. "He was at the diner earlier. He gave me—" My voice cracked. "He gave me an envelope and then left. I followed him when I thought something was wrong." The flashlight beam fell across Thomas's pale face as the officers exchanged a look I didn't want to understand. "We need EMS," the officer said into his radio. "Unresponsive male, approximately late 70s, possible cardiac event." I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly freezing despite the heat of panic burning through my chest. The world around us felt too big, too empty, too dark. I watched helplessly as the officer began chest compressions. Each push looked desperate, heavy, urgent. Come on," the officer murmured under his breath. I wiped at my eyes, my vision blurring again. "Please," I whispered, "please don't let him die out here alone." But the forest stayed quiet. The branches didn't move. The wind didn't stir. It felt like the entire night was holding on to its last breath with him. Minutes later, though it felt like hours, the distant wail of sirens finally cut through the silence. Red and blue lights painted the trees as paramedics rushed toward us, carrying equipment. One EMT took over compressions. Another started attaching monitors. They moved fast, expertly, but the expressions on their faces told a story they weren't ready to say out loud. I stood there shaking, clutching the dog tag in one hand and the old envelope in the other. The weight of both felt unbearable. Then one of the paramedics looked up at me. His eyes softened just slightly. "Ma'am, did he say anything before collapsing?" I swallowed hard. "Yes. He said he wanted to leave the world on a good memory." For a moment, even the paramedics went still. The kneeling EMT lowered his head, exhaling. "We'll do everything we can." But I could hear the truth in his voice. They were already losing him. Then, just as they prepared to lift Thomas onto a stretcher, the radio on the officer's shoulder crackled. "Be advised," the dispatcher said. "We have new information on the missing veteran. Next of kin just called in. He wasn't supposed to be out alone. He left the hospital earlier today without discharge." My heart dropped. Hospital? Discharge? What was he running from?
Hospital? My mind screamed. How could he have left the hospital on his own, and why? Every step, every detail of the night suddenly felt heavier, like I had stumbled into something far bigger than a simple act of kindness. I followed the paramedics as they loaded Thomas onto the stretcher, gripping the dog tag and envelope like lifelines. My heart pounded so hard I thought the walls of the ambulance would shake. One of the EMTs glanced at me, noticing my white-knuckled grip. "Ma'am, you can ride in the back with him," she offered. "It'll be safer than running behind." I didn't hesitate. I climbed in, sliding next to Thomas, feeling the coldness of the stretcher beneath him. The envelope lay beside him, as if it, too, belonged there. My fingers brushed it occasionally, as if holding it could somehow anchor him to the world. "Sir," I whispered, brushing his hand gently, "please, stay with me. You're not invisible, you're not forgotten. I see you." His lips twitched faintly. He seemed to hear me, but his eyes were closed. So fragile. So human. The ride to the hospital was tense and silent, filled with the occasional beeps and whirs of the medical equipment. I tried to keep my panic at bay, focusing on the warmth of my hands brushing his, on the steady rhythm of my words. "You're still here. You're still here. You're not alone." Hours later, though it felt like days, the ambulance screeched to a halt outside the ER. Doctors and nurses swarmed Thomas immediately, whisking him inside. I was pushed back, my coat damp from sweat, my knees weak. The envelope slipped from my hand as I tried to keep up, and I watched it fall to the floor. Then a nurse picked it up, studying it briefly. "Is this his?" she asked. I nodded. "He gave it to me before he collapsed." The nurse's eyes softened.
We'll make sure it gets to the right place. Now go sit down. I sank into a chair, trembling, replaying every moment of the night. The kindness I thought was small, almost insignificant, had thrown me headfirst into a story bigger than I could ever imagine. Hours passed. Minutes felt like eternity. Finally, a doctor emerged, pulling me aside. His face was grave but not hopeless. "He's stable," the doctor said. "We don't know the full extent yet, but your quick action likely saved his life." Tears blurred my vision. "Saved him?" I whispered. "You mean—" "Yes, you saved him, and there's more. We traced his family. They were unaware he'd left. He could have been gone for good, but thanks to you, he's alive." I felt my knees give out, relief crashing over me in waves. But there was something else. He had left me with a story, a check, a dog tag, and a reminder that even one small act of kindness could ripple farther than I could ever imagine. And then I realized the envelope. I opened it carefully, fingers trembling, and inside, a note. Just 4 words. "Thank you. Don't stop." I stared at them, my chest swelling. Thomas had left me not just a tip, not just a gift, but a responsibility. To keep seeing, to keep caring, to keep believing in humanity. I sat in the hospital waiting room, clutching the envelope as if it contained more than just words. In a strange way, it did. It carried the weight of a life lived quietly, of sacrifices no one saw, and of gratitude that couldn't be measured in dollars or hours. Finally, a nurse approached me. "He's awake," she said softly. "You can see him now." I followed her into the small ICU room, and there he was, Thomas Hale. Older than I remembered, frail in ways that made my chest ache, but alive. His eyes, still tired, lit up faintly when they found mine. "Miss," he whispered, voice raspy but present. You stayed." "I did," I said, swallowing hard. "I promised I would." He managed a small smile, and for a moment the fear, the panic, and the uncertainty of the night melted away. "You saved me," he said quietly. "Not just tonight. By seeing me, by acknowledging me, you saved a part of my soul that's been missing for years." I felt tears welling up. "You didn't need saving," I murmured, my voice breaking. I just wanted to help." He shook his head. "Kindness isn't ever just help. It's a lifeline. And tonight, you reminded me that someone still notices." I looked down at the dog tag still in my hand, and then at the envelope. Everything suddenly made sense. The $50,000 check, the dog tag, and the note weren't just gifts. They were symbols of trust, of connection, of human decency. "I don't know what to say," I whispered. "You already did," he replied, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You said it with your actions." I reached over and took his hand, holding it gently. And for the first time that night, the weight of fear lifted. The hospital was quiet except for the faint beep of monitors, but in that room, a bridge had formed between 2 strangers, between a man who had served and someone who simply cared. When I finally left the hospital hours later, the sky was just starting to lighten. I walked back to my car, clutching the envelope, the dog tag still warm in my palm. I knew this night, this experience, would stay with me forever. Sometimes, the smallest gestures can create the largest echoes. Sometimes a cup of coffee, a meal, or a simple act of attention can change a life. And sometimes, it can change yours too. As I drove home, I whispered into the quiet of my car, "Thank you, Thomas, for everything." And I knew I would never forget him or the lesson he had left me. That night taught me something I'll carry forever. Kindness has a power far beyond what we can imagine. Paying for a stranger's meal seems small, almost insignificant, but it created ripples that stretched into ways I could never predict. Thomas Hale, a veteran who had seen too much and been unseen for years, reminded me that acknowledgement, care, and empathy are lifelines in a world that often rushes by too fast. If you ever think your small act won't matter, remember Thomas Hale. Remember that one meal, one smile, one moment of recognition can save a life, and maybe even your own. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, share your thoughts in the comments, and let kindness ripple forward.